Welcome everyone. Today we have our new episode and this is very important, distributed manufacturing, and this is very important. And beside that, World Talent Economy Forum, now they are growing their family, because when our audience do not observe Professor Donalds or Mr. James Seed or Professor Edwards, everybody ask me why they are, what is happened, when we can know about different topics. So this is very interesting, because and we will be very happy if we can invite all of our speakers in Malaysia and Singapore, and we can do our offline summit. Hopefully, by end of this year, we can do it. We have our preparations. Because especially our youth community, our policymaker, our industrial people, they're very much interested to working with World Talent Economy Forum, even though different research organization, academy, think tank, they are already collaborate with us. So Professor Edwards, Professor Donald, James Reed, all of our speaker is very, very valuable for Asia Pacific people. So I want to start from Professor Edwards. So how do you want to analyze distributed manufacturing? And beside that, uh, for manufacturing hub, let's say I just want to share one example. Let's say India, just last year's Indian governments, their prime ministers, with the help of Tata groups and all of their business organization, they are launching, they are planning for uh, how they can develop Indian manufacturing hub in South Asia. Country like Bangladesh also doing, Malaysia and China, Vietnam, they are in advanced stage. So that's why we love to know more about policy. And you are world famous policy makers, and you develop a lot of policy around the world. So how do you want to advise our like Asia Pacific community?
Well, I want to start by framing the issue, okay?
Yes.
And I'm going to give you two interesting examples before we get into the discussion of the current technology, which is absolutely wonderful. The first example I'll give about distributed technology and distributed manufacturing is I'm holding up a pencil for anyone who is listening rather than watching the show. Nobody on the planet Earth knows how to make a pencil. No one.
Hmm.
There was a famous essay done something like 50 or 60 years ago by an incredible economist named Leonard Read, and it was called I Pencil. And he explained that, well, if you want to make a pencil, you need the wood. Well, where do you get the wood? Well, you have to chop down trees. How do you chop down trees? Well, you need a saw. Well, how do you get the saw? Where do you get the metal to make the saw? How do you design the saw? And then once you get the tree down, well, a big tree there. What do you do with that? Well, you have to cut it up. Well, where do you cut it up? How do you transport it to the place where it's going to be cut up into pieces? And it's probably not going to be made into these little pieces. You're probably going to have a special manufacturing facility to make it into this little thing. And then you have, of course, graphite in here. Where does graphite come from? Does it come from a mine? Was it where do you get it? And how do you get it into the little thing here? And what about the eraser? What is that? Pumice from Italy or what? Nobody knows how to make a pencil. The way pencils are made is entrepreneurs figure out that, well, these folks have this resource and these folks have this resource and some other folks over here have this resource. If I take this and this and this and put them together, I can make a pencil. The point is you have distributed knowledge of how to make saws, distributed knowledge of how to transport the things, distributed knowledge about how to make a factory that cuts wood, distributed knowledge. And the importance of that is that nobody knows all of the pieces. That's why the entrepreneur is so important, to look at these capacities and to put them together. I want to give you a second example of distributed manufacturing. I've got them right here in my hands. Now, unfortunately, in the past, the United States has had some very bad trade policies with the Asian Pacific community. Because the United States wanted to protect its own garment industry. It wouldn't say, well, everyone can sell however many shirts in the United States you want. They would say, well, Indonesia, you can only sell this many shirts, and Malaysia, you can only sell this many shirts, and Hong Kong and Vietnam and so forth. It's called quotas. It's a stupid system because Americans have to pay higher prices, even though we could buy the product from some other country. And so what happened, and this is this distributed manufacturing getting around stupid American regulations, is that let's say one country has a high quota, the other country has a low quota, or they've used their quota. Well, what happens is I've got three examples right here. I've got three shirts. Now, this particular shirt was manufactured, so they say, in Vietnam. This is
Mhm.
supposed to be a Vietnamese shirt. Well, is it? Here's another shirt. Let me see where this was manufactured.
Mhm.
Hong Kong. This is a Hong Kong shirt, right?
Yes.
Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I've got another shirt right here. Oh my gosh, this shirt is an Indonesian shirt. Hi, all you guys in Indonesia. This is an Indonesian shirt. Is it really? No, not necessarily. Here's why. What happens is to get around the quotas, um, you might have, for example, maybe Vietnam simply cuts out the cloth and maybe cuts the cloth into little pieces that can be made into the body of the shirt and the sleeves of the shirt. Then perhaps because their quota is very low, maybe they ship it off to Indonesia. And the Indonesians take the pieces of strips and basically sew them together so they make the little tubes that we call the sleeve to the shirt. Okay, see, and
Mhm.
they sew the pieces together, and they sew the little they have a little collar piece, and they sew the little collar piece together. Then they shoot it over to Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong folks take and they sew this sleeve onto the shirt, and they sew the buttons on and so forth. So it's made in 3 or 4 different countries. And the reason is because there's a rule in the United States, the trade laws that say wherever significant transformation took place, that's where the label will go. So even though this shirt might have been made in Vietnam and Indonesia and Hong Kong, and the pieces are all shipped around, well, it has a label here that says, Hong Kong or whatever. The point is, that's a way distributed manufacturing gets around stupid trade laws. I'm for free trade. I want to trade with Asians. I want to trade with Mexicans. I want to trade with everybody. Okay. But that's the way distributed manufacturing works. But of course, in today's new era, it's much, much more sophisticated because we have blockchain where we can get supplies sent around in a different way. We have 3D printing.
Mhm.
So you're going to see manufacturing become much more customized, for example. So it's not just a factory that's turning out a whole bunch of these things. It's a factory that's turning out maybe one is this shape, one is that shape, because somebody wants 100,000 of those things. And so you're going to get a very different look for manufacturing in the future. By the way, obviously there's an international aspect of this, but what you're going to find is that, as in the past, companies and entrepreneurs are going to look for things like price. Why is this produced in a certain country? Well, because you can do it a lot cheaper than you can do it in the United States. Quality. If the stuff is junk, Americans aren't going to buy it. So you need to have a country that really has quality control. In the case of, for example, pharmaceuticals, India has come in for a lot of criticism for not having the kind of quality control with pharmaceutical production, even though their prices are very, very low, whereas other countries have much better quality control. So that's going to be an important issue. And of course, frankly, political stability. If you're worried about China, for example, and how stable are they going to be, or are they going to do some sort of political thing that hurts the United States or whatever other country, then you're going to diversify manufacturing internationally to make sure that, for example, Apple is concerned right now that so much of their production is in China, and China is not being very friendly right now. So, and of course, you had the COVID thing, so you had the whole delay in getting things out from there. So there are going to be those issues as well. But the point is that exponential technology really offers an opportunity to build on what's been going on literally for centuries. Distributed manufacturing, everything is not produced here. Entrepreneurs pull the stuff together. We have much more in terms of opportunities today with the advanced technologies. That's, I think, how to frame the discussion here.
Excellent, excellent, Professor Edward. I think that like you have a real life experience from garments industry. That is called the world class policymakers, and this is the beauty. Even I think developing nations, different professors and other people, those who are actually develop policies and other things, they can learn from Professor Edward how we give example from Asia Pacific, different kind of shards and other things. This is the way we should engage with the market. We should
By the way,
engage
this
with the
shirt,
industry.
Yeah, by the way, this shirt is from Lithuania, and because of
Okay.
I had it kind of custom made there because I thought it was a real neat design, and so it's interesting because I was in Lithuania in
Yes.
1990 doing free market conferences, and so
Yes.
now there's a nice free market company that produces shirts that I can buy. So thank you, Lithuania.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Edwards. Professor Donalds, how do you want to analyze this distributed manufacturing? What's the impact it has in COVID-19 situations? Specifically, this manufacturing industry has a lot of progression, lot of challenges in COVID situation. What are your observation and how do you want to analyze?
Well, basically, I agree with part of what Edward said, which is that if the manufacturing's always been distributed. I mean, it's, even back in the days when people were making horses, they made the first wheels. Somebody made the wheels and somebody else put them together onto carts. I mean, it wasn't, no one person is able to do all of this. I mean, it could be distributed in a small space. So if you're building a car in an automobile plant, like one person screws on the wheels, and one person does this, and one person does that, and it's amazing how we have. You don't know where your shirt comes from or anything else like that. I mean, and it requires just layer after layer. Somebody has to mine the steel to make the scissors, to cut the cloth, to blah blah blah. And all these different pieces are in our society. The knowledge is distributed across society. So when you look at distributed manufacturing, in a way, you're just looking. I mean, it's part of just the way everything is. Human beings' knowledge is distributed. The knowledges of our language are not something we make up. We can't make up our own language. So in a sense, it's a kind of an argument against overly individualistic views of things, because it basically points out that no one can do anything without the relationships with other people. If you look at people like economic theory, there's a group of economists that are Austrian economists. I was really taken with them at one time. I read virtually everything by Hayek. And then I came to realize that they were fundamentally wrong. And one of the chief one of the most famous one was a guy named Mises. And Mises argued that you couldn't actually study society because that it was, that's a fundamentally flawed book. And so he came to the idea that you really couldn't study things like distributed manufacturing and things like that because his epistemological view was that you couldn't get evidence in the same way you could do it with physical systems. So Hayek and others, Hayek argued this, Mises argued this, which is that the way that we could study society was flawed. It wasn't scientific. And that, in a way, was a reaction to what the Soviets had been doing. And so what wound up happening is that when the Soviet Union was first starting, statistics was fairly new. It was, and some of the modern statistics like we use now, like Edward uses for his index of economic freedom, and I can't actually, I looked and looked and looked, and I can't actually find the statistical models that he uses, but I'll ask him about that so he can share them with me. But regardless, the Russians believed that using statistics, you could model the economy and be able to have a view of the economy that would allow central control. So you could have a scientific view, a scientific idea of what the economy was. And you can't really do that yet because there's not enough, you can't be sure you're getting all the data that you need to have.
And you never will.
Yeah. but that's all. That's a very like that's kind of a, I don't know how to say it. It's a ideological view. It's not a real view, because if you look at the person who founded the welfare, who's considered to be the like basically father of the welfare states, a guy named Lester Ward. And Lester Ward was the first head of the American Sociological Association. He's an American sociologist. And his view was dynamic. So the idea was, yes, we can't ever know something with that degree of complexity. However, what we can do is we can make changes and see what happens based on the changes, and then continually modify what we do. And that's what Finland does. I mean, Finland tries something, and if it doesn't work, they go, okay, this isn't working, let's change it. Estonia, other countries like that. America is very, very bad about that, because we have a group of people who have an ideological past of America, where America was wonderful and great, and now you know, we're not doing that anymore. So we have to go back to our wonderful past, where, you know, we had the wonderful plantations and all the happy slaves and stuff like that.
What?
But
What?
that's what I think of Edward's view, actually.
That's free markets. Slavery is free markets.
Sure it is. It's just free marketing people.
That is nuts. That is nuts.
Anyway, we will discuss on that point.
But anyway, my point is, what's going on to what I'm trying to say, what I want to say
rein it in.
What I want to finish saying is that we've been studying complex systems for 50 or 60 years. We have techniques like social network analysis. We have new statistical models. We're understanding more how the brain works. The brain is a prediction machine. It's not. It isn't responding to the sensory data in a direct way. We're understanding all these different kinds of things. And while we can't know everything, the Austrian idea that we have to use deductive reasoning to be able to reason about society, and the axiom of human choice, or whatever it was called, it's nonsense. And so a developing nation really needs to be able to start looking into the ways we have of looking at and measuring the things that are going on. I'm not big on tariffs. I think that's just mercantilism. It's ridiculous. It's an ancient.
Thank you.
We agree on that one.
Thank you. Mr. Jamsid, how do you want to analyze today's topic, and how you want to share your experience with our audience?
Thank you, Sharif, for inviting me, and also for the topic and the panelists that you've assembled. Once again, well done. I do want to start with a correction of what I said at the last show, when I was arguing that we need a social safety net and a system that allows the social safety net and people to thrive if they have the ability and can. And I said there is no such model. And I have to correct myself. I think the Scandinavian countries are that kind of model, or we can think about them. And thanks to Professor Donald, I can think of now Finland, including something that I was more thinking Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Okay, and thanks to Professor Edward, it's maybe Estonia. These things. This is why I learn when I come on your shows, because those were two countries that I had not focused on until I heard your other speakers talk about them and what they're doing. And so it's amazing to me how much I learn on these shows. I also want to talk about the political instability that Professor Edward mentioned, because part of my work in my foundation, we're discussing building a chess academy in Uganda, and it's the political instability that's causing us to pause. Because do we have the resources to buy the land, build the building, and hire the teachers? Yes. Do we want to? I just don't know. Is it sustainable? Would it be there? We would buy the land, and then all of a sudden the documents would be lost? I'm not sure. So it gives you pause. I wanted to talk a little bit about distributed manufacturing versus outsourcing, because what we do in the United States is a great deal is we say, oh, well, it's really expensive to have this factory and produce these goods in this country. Why don't we put it in another country that doesn't tax us so much? And why don't we build it there and then distribute it back to us? Ooh, that's a good idea. Let's and all of a sudden the people that had those jobs in the United States no longer have jobs, and people in other countries do. So when we're talking about distributed manufacturing, are we talking about outsourcing? I don't think so. I think we're talking about something else, and that something else is putting together disparate um, qualities and bringing them together to make a functional, useful tool, apparatus, policy, whatever. But it's to bring together we find out that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Each part has a certain amount of value, but when you assemble it together from these variety of different points, it's more valuable than each individual cost of acquiring the metal, acquiring the wood, acquiring the Italian eraser head. So this is, I think, a fundamental thing. We're creating something of greater value through distributed manufacturing than each of the individual parts represent on their own. And even if you add up those individual parts, they still don't come up to the final product in terms of value. They're still a little bit short. Now, we talked about, say the pencil example Professor Edward used, and very well done, by the way. And but then it was in the way he expressed it, was an entrepreneur put it all together. Well, my experience of reading history is that sometimes it's a giant corporation, I'll just call it Giant Co, that puts it all together. Or it's an entrepreneur that comes up with the idea and Giant Co buys it from them. And sometimes the entrepreneur is doing it and unknown to him, Giant Co figures out how he's doing it and then patents it so that he can't do it anymore. So, there's a lot of things when we think about this, this wonderful concept of distributed manufacturing. How does it actually work in the real world? And we find over and over again that giant corporations take control of these valuable ideas. And if they can't take control of it, they might hire you and give you more money than you thought you could ever earn in a year just to do it for them. Now, I'm not criticizing this approach. I'm not suggesting there's a better approach. Actually, I am. I think that the giant corporations that take the good ideas end up stifling these good ideas. And we really want the people to bear the profits of their good ideas. And sometimes they're just acquired, taken away from them. Sometimes outright taken away from them. Sometimes they get nickels and dimes where the Giant Co is making dollars. So there are things that we have to figure out. But the concept is one that we could full-heartedly support. So thank you again for this wonderful discussion, Sharif.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsid. My friend, Mr. Manuel. Manuel, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
What do you want to add for today? We are discussing on distributed manufacturing. So yes, what's your views? And yeah.
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. So yeah, what I would like to point out today is the fact that a distributed manufacturing is decentralized, and also one of the important technology that is being used for that is the Internet of Things, the connection between the different technologies, yeah, and that are integrated, and also a 3D printing, like additive manufacturing, which is also important, and also I would like to point out, like, for a specific project, it's important to plan the how we are going to uh, inculcate the digitalization, the automation part, and the optimization of the manufacturing process, and that could be applied for any project that we are doing. And also the advantages of, like, the reducing of the cost for of manufacturing, and also an opportunity for developing countries to have their own industries. And having their own industries, it means they can produce uh, more product that they need, because sometimes the product that are imported from other countries, they are not what exactly is needed, but the local industries, they know exactly what the population needs, so that they can produce yeah, accordingly. And also, I can take one example. For example, in my field, if we take 30 years ago, most of the developing countries, they couldn't afford to have a satellite in orbit because it costs like a lot. But these days we have cube satellites, and most of the cube satellites are manufactured using 3D printers. So now it is allowing more of the developing countries to also have their um, own satellites into orbit, which they are using for different applications like farming, Earth observation, and many more. And also the importance of distributed manufacturing for B2B industries and for B2C industries. So yeah, and if we are still talking about developing countries, having this distributed manufacturing, these 3D printers, it's allowing to have more inventions coming on, because the cost of the manufacturing of prototyping the ideas are reduced. So it's helping also to grow the intellectual property and bringing up new startups as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to add few points. I'm actually big fan of globalizations. Yes, if you have a different opinion, I don't mind. Let's say I live in Malaysia, Subang Jaya. It's a very good academic hub, like University of Malaya, uh, Monash University, Sunway Groups, all of the important tailors in near my house. Everything in 10 to 15 minutes drive. Beside that, MIT has their collaborations in Subang, Shah Alam. Shah Alam is the biggest manufacturing hub in Malaysia. All of the like Carlsbergs and many Petronas, like all of the big manufacturers actually in Shah Alam. Beside that, this MIT, this supply chain innovation in institution, they are actually helping this manufacturing organization with the help of Malaysian supply chain like organizations, and they are actually help to grow their capacity with what we are discussing, these 3D printed, these automations, this robotics, AI, and a lot more things. This MIT actually helps in Malaysia inside. So this is very beautiful combinations of globalization, I want to say. Malaysia has their own Bhumiputra law. Beside that, they have foreign investor, those who invest for the manufacturing, as well as MIT is a modern organizations. They are actually through their supply chain innovations, send institute and many MIT professors regularly. I think 80% professors actually from MIT, they regularly come and they nurture this ecosystem. So I saw that it has a very interesting growth. It's a very good combination of local ecosystem and global collaborations. So regularly I try to visit regularly this MIT like campus, as well as different manufacturing centers. But from my point of view, it's a good example of globalization, and it has very good impact on employments and many things. And here actually employee salaries and everything is very high, very high. It's not, we cannot say that they are slaves or something. Even today I saw one of the job, it said senior managerial position is around 30 to 40,000 ringgit per month. it's around $10,000. So it's not bad. It's my observation, but I want to learn more. So Professor Edward, what do you
Mhm.
want to add?
Well, by the way, I'll make another observation. You're talking about salary increases and more specifically, being able to afford things. And going sort of back to your last show on poverty, China went from having 9 out of 10 of its subjects in abject poverty, defined by the by international standards, in say around 1975 or 1980, 9 out of 10 in abject poverty. Today, it's only 1 out of 10. And the reason is because starting in the late 1970s, they started doing the right things. It's not because the communists there were nice humanists. They wanted to have a stronger economy. And in
Mhm.
fact, they succeeded. I fear that they're falling back now. But the point is that living standards so increased in China, and I could talk about Malaysia. Look at Kuala Lumpur. Look at what an incredible place it is. And look at it, what it was like 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think
Mhm.
these are all very good examples of globalization. And globalization helps everybody. If I'm an American, I don't want to pay $20 or $30 for a shirt for my kids or for myself if I can buy the same shirt at a local store in the United States for $5 because it was made in Indonesia. And that means that Americans are freed up to produce other stuff. And so, just to put the globalization point that you make, I think is very, very much on the mark. But a couple of other quick points I want to make. Um, my doctoral dissertation was on the political and ethical implications of Ludwig von Mises' praxeology, with
Mhm.
a big emphasis on entrepreneurship. And there's an Austrian economist who's still alive today who was a student of Mises, called Israel Kirzner. And if any of you are interested in the theoretical basis in the Austrian school of entrepreneurship, look at Israel Kirzner's work, because entrepreneurship is really central to this
Mhm.
view that we don't have, we cannot, and never have sort of universal knowledge to plan. That was one of the things, if you study the Soviet system and central planning systems, they usually fail because garbage in, garbage out. Because ultimately it's the customer who's making the decisions. Customer choices change, customer priorities change. As I'm suddenly able to get shirts much cheaper, I've got more income that I can spend on some other items. So
Mhm.
if, and especially in the age of exponential technology, and some of the new technologies we're talking about, 3D printing and so forth, entrepreneurship and using decentralized knowledge, as well as looking at overall trends, as Donald has suggested, is even more important today than it was in the past. Um, and by the way, just a little side note here, um, because I have done studies on this. The Scandinavian countries, for the most part, have improved incredibly on the index of economic freedom. Everyone says, well, they're all socialists and so it proves it works. No, you actually look at it, you see the Scandinavian countries do better than the United States on 3 or 4 indicators. So I'll call your attention to that. But I want to say something about the cost, because this is an important issue, as brought up by James and some of the others. That's part of the progress of distributed manufacturing. In globally, for example, what you saw going back to the 60s and 70s is the advent of big cargo ships and big container vessels and so forth, which really brought down the costs of oil and of shipping, where you could put these mass big ships that are almost a mile long and ship stuff at a very, very low cost. That's been one of the big helps. In the United States, in the late 1970s and early 80s, one of our big reforms that was very important was deregulating trucking. We had trucking regulations, so a truck might drive from New York City to Denver to drop off a cargo, and then because of regulations, they had to drive back empty. Well, we
Mhm.
deregulated trucking under Jimmy Carter, by the way, who was a Democrat, and the costs went way down, so manufacturing could be more distributed. So because you had so-called just-in-time manufacturing, where you didn't have to keep huge warehouses full of stuff, worried that, well, we might not be able to get the product because of the shipping, and the cost went down as well. The other thing I'll mention, and this is something James brought up, and it's a very important subject. If we were having this conversation in 1980, in the
Mhm.
1980s, we would be complaining about IBM and the big corporation, and you've got this little place called Apple and this other little place called Microsoft. And my gosh, it's so unfair. And we've got to do something to be fair about it. Well, of course, now the biggest corporations in the world are Apple, Microsoft, and these corporations. Big corporations come from little corporations that do it right. And it's important to leave it open. I don't know what Malaysian or Indonesian companies are going to be the world leaders 10 years from now. And part of our discussion is to facilitate, when Asians, when Singapore people in Singapore, well, Singapore's already doing it, but Malaysia and other countries can bring these things together. The danger is a political one. In other words, if Apple Computer or Microsoft or IBM or General Motors or any of these companies use their economic power to, for example, get tariffs to keep out Asian products, that's going to hurt me as an American because I want to buy from you guys, right? It's going to hurt me as a customer, and it's going to hurt your companies. It's not going to do anyone really any help except for the folks who have political power. So that is really a danger. But if you leave the system open, again, nobody could knock off IBM. It was the biggest company, computer company in the United States. No one is ever going to do that, ever, ever, ever. Apple did it. Microsoft did it. That's why you have to keep an open system where you can have small companies do that. And I'm working right now with pharmaceutical companies, small ones. I'm having, in fact, right after I get off this call, I have to get on another call about pharmaceutical companies in this country because we have regulations that harm the small companies, and then the small companies, innovative companies in pharmaceuticals, get bought up by the big companies, not out of maliciousness, but the big companies say, well, they've got some resources, maybe we can use them. But then it becomes part of a bureaucracy, and it becomes less efficient than the small entrepreneurial company. So these are important issues, but I think that the answer is to keep the system as open as possible, keep the system as global as possible. Again, in the 60s and into the 70s, nobody was ever going to be better than General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler in the United States. They were just so big, no way anyone was going to ever take them down. Guess what? Honda, Toyota, and some of those companies did exactly that because they produced good products, cheaper, and their quality control, especially Toyota, over those years really increased, whereas General Motors and some of the others were really negligent on quality control. So anyway, keep an open system just as you should keep an open mind.
Thank you, Professor Edward. I just want to add a few points. I was a long time. I was in Europe, as well as I think more than 36 countries I visited last few years. But one thing I can share that Malaysia has Petronas. Petronas is Fortune Global 500 companies, one of the largest corporations. It's actually backbone of Malaysia. Beside that, even where I live near is Sunway Group. You can check Sunway Group. Its chairman is a Jeffrey Chia, one of the dynamic organizations. Even many of my American friends, they actually visit Malaysia, and they visit Sunway Group. Everything they have university, two big university, Monash and Sunway. They have international school, they have hospital, they have hotel, motel, smart cities, and I'm sure this is very high quality. I'm sure the American friend, those who come from California, from New York, even from Washington DC, those who visited with me, they feel that it's actually excellent. But definitely we will arrange the summit and other things with maybe these universities, and I'm sure I'm not trying to selling Malaysia, but it's beautiful manufacturing wise, as well as infrastructure wise and facility wise, and it's not so expensive like USA or Singapore. It's very cheap, and it's a very strategic place for getting to China, getting to India. So I always invite my friends, my family, visit Malaysia. Hopefully it will change your perception of what's going on inside Malaysia. So Professor Donalds, I'm also a big fan of Europe. So what you want to share with us?
Well, I want to support something that Edward said, which is that one of the pieces of economic theory that's kind of held up all the way back from the time of the American Revolution was a guy named Ricardo, and he had the idea of what was called comparative advantage, and the model they give in economics textbooks is that that German bread is very, very good, and even better than French bread. But French wine is very, very good and better than German wine. So if the Germans make wine, they're going to be making lower quality wine. And if the French make bread, they're going to be making lower quality bread. But if the French make wine and the Germans make bread and they exchange it with each other, then both of them are going to wind up having better quality stuff. And I think that really holds up, that every place has the things that they're good at. And so I think that the whole idea, I'm very much for free trade, but I've just been reading this book right now, and I haven't finished it yet, called The Tyranny of Merit. And it's a fantastic book, and it speaks to a lot of things I've been thinking about a lot, which is that how do we know that Steve Jobs is this wonderful entrepreneur that did all the things that he did? How do we know that Bill Gates, there's a story about Jobs being in a meeting once where he actually was saying, well, I did this and this. And the people turned to him and they said, no, you didn't, Steve. That was some marketing thing that we wrote. You didn't actually do that. So we create these great man stories, these hero stories about people. And we say, well, it's this entrepreneur that did this and this entrepreneur that did that. But in reality, it's the interaction between a lot of different people that make things happen, and changes can't be in great leaps. The second to the most cited paper in sociology is a paper called The Iron Cage Revisited by Woody Powell and I think Damasio, but who is one of my like mentors at Stanford. Woody was. I was in his. I was a visiting scholar in his department for a quarter, and he basically points out that you can't really do something that's completely new, because nobody will understand what it is, nobody will finance it, nobody will, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. And so people have to like make an analogy to something that already exists to be able to create a story for something that people are going to be able to buy into. You can't say, well, there's no market for this, there's nothing, it's a completely new idea, give me some money for it. People are going to go, kidding. And oh, I hope your beeper works. Anyway, so I think that we all need to realize within our society is find ways of like acknowledging the fact that we're working together on these things. So distributed manufacturing can be an incredible boon, but think about it. Who makes the 3D printers? So here you are in Asia and you're using these 3D printers. Who are you buying them from? I mean, who are you buying your semiconductor manufacturing equipment from? Are you making it yourself in Malaysia? No, you're not. So there is an aspect of it where you wind up getting controlled by who has the resources. And I mean, there's a view of power, which I think has some merit, which is the idea that somebody has power over you if they control a resource that you need. And so one of the issues about distributing manufacturing that's useful to think about and look at is where are the bottlenecks where somebody just turned them off, you're dead. And I think that from a policy point of view, that would be a very, very wise. One of the things that corporations do is they get multiple sources. So if one of the sources raises their price too much or breaks down, then they can get it from someone else. And in COVID, we just saw this in spades because so many of the supply chains got messed up and people didn't have alternative sources for it. And so manufacturing just halted in a lot of areas. In fact, right now, it's hard to buy a car because there's not enough chips to make them right now. So a new car in the United States. So anyway, that's something to throw into the mix there.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsid.
Thanks, Sharif. Yeah, we can talk about IBM, a company I've made a lot of money from, and Apple, a company I've made a lot of money from. I'm not against any of them. I missed the boat on Amazon. I didn't buy their stock when I should have. But in any case, the idea that IBM is this big giant, and look at Apple and Microsoft. Well, what about all the companies that didn't make it? What about all the talent that was stifled by IBM? I remember Ross Perot running for president, talking about he can't imagine a country without General Motors. And there was a time when we said what's good for General Motors is good for the country. So all of this will change. The only thing we can count on is change. But these giant corporations do stifle competition, and there are exceptions that prove the rule. People break out despite the attempts to stifle the competition. And the giant co of today will not be the giant co of tomorrow, but there will be a giant co. So we have to accept this as reality and plan accordingly. What are we going to do? Because we could always find the hero, the person that we will say, look what that person did. And we will dig deeper, as Professor Donald was saying, and we'll find that, no, he didn't do it by himself. No, that's not the way it really works in the real world. So, we have we could always, if we have a certain bias, we could always confirm it if we were looking for the examples that will confirm it. So, the idea is to just be more objective about it and look at the reality of the situation. And are giant corporations good? Are they neutral? Are they bad? Or are they just part of the reality? And we just have to plan accordingly. I would tend to think that's the way it's going to be. There will be giant corporations. There will be an entrepreneur. 8 or 9 out of 10 of them will fail. And, the 10th will be a success, and we'll point to the 10th and we'll say, don't make the mistake of saying everybody should be an entrepreneur. Look at what happened to this guy, because 8 out of 9 of them will fail. And what do we do about those? So that's where I say we have to have a social safety net. We have to plan that these people will fail far more often than they will succeed. And their success will be rewarded. But how much should they be rewarded? Should they be buying yachts and launching themselves into space? Is that really a just society? Maybe yes. Maybe your answer is yes. Absolutely. Yes. I would beg to disagree.
I'm heading for Mars.
Good luck to you. Send me a postcard. Wish you were here. But the idea here is to use this concept of distributed manufacturing wisely, and don't allow it to be absorbed by someone who doesn't care about the planet, doesn't care about human suffering. Don't allow that, because it's possible that would happen. Don't assume that it will be equally distributed. You can distribute the manufacturing, but the wealth may not be equally distributed. There may be slave labor doing the work, and just a handful of people making the money. So let's do this wisely, justly. And then we can pat ourselves on the back, but not until then. Thanks, Sharif.
Thank you. As I am from developing nations, I just want to add point, because I'm closely observing different kind of developing nation. Example, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, and this kind of countries. So yes, they are actually doing different kind of primary job. Let's say they are manufacturing clothes, or example, they are people, example, Bangladeshi people or Pakistani people, they come to Malaysia and do work as a as a semi-skilled worker. But they're not doing bad. If I like from the grassroots level, I try to visit their house and what the economic progressions they have. They have a good economic progressions. Even the COVID-19 situation, actually, this kind of people, they send good amount of money to their countries, and that's why this country economically they are surviving, and they are sending more money. Example, country like Bangladesh, they have $45 billion they get in COVID-19 situations from their foreign worker. So I know that many people think, say, they are the root level workers, they are not too much of uh, uh, like expert or highly skilled, but fact is that they are very responsible for their country. They are very responsible. Even I visit their own home and other country, they have 3-storied building in their house. So this is called economic progression. Actually, developing nations economic progression is completely different. Their economy is not too much of dependent on loan or other things, but with small task, micro initiative, micro loans, people's like grassroots level people, they are actually contributing a lot. So Mr. Manuel, what do you want to add today?
Sure, thank you. So the point I would like to add is, yeah, like our guest speakers mentioned it before, um, like having a globalization, it's allowing to create employment and a raise of salary as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think what we should look into is if those companies are keeping an eye on the ethics and social responsibility, because maybe the policies that they have in their home countries, it's more like quite demanding, like asking them to respect the employees in this way, to consider them in this way. But in those developing countries, maybe there is nothing like that. So are they going to follow the same ethics and the same social responsibility? So that's also the point we should look into. And also, one point I would like to bring is the fact that some of the products, um, sometimes some of the products that are manufactured by those companies are meant for the developed countries, not for the developing countries. So it is like sometimes you have industries in those developing countries, but that's actually not helping the developing countries, but it's just for the developed countries. I can take an example on agriculture. um, I know like it's quite a different topic, but if you take agriculture, most of the developing countries, they receive some help from the developed countries and some organization, multinational companies, but there is a requirement of what you need to the product that you need to uh, like to the farming, the kind of farming that you need to do. It should be like cotton, it should be cafe, it should be cacao, like those kind of product that they could be that could be exported to the developed countries. But at the same time, they use some products that are actually harming the local products, and because of that, it can harm the local products, and some of the local farmers, they have some trouble and they cannot get their product to sell, and it's actually dragging the economy of those countries even more. So I would say that one side of the globalization is good, it's creating job, but another side, we should also look into the ethics and the social responsibility. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you. This is very good point. I just want to add, because as Professor Edward give example from garments industry, as regularly I also visited the garments industries, and when example H&M order Vietnam, or example Indonesia or Bangladesh, because garment in Bangladesh is second largest manufacturer like this garments and these things. So that time they actually maintain compliance, like compliance for safety and security of the garments worker, compliance for their salary, compliance for their healthcare systems. So I'm very honest with you, yes, there are many questions. Even reality is that this kind of company, let's say those who are under the compliance of the foreign company, let's say H&M, they actually perform more if I compare to the national company. National companies, sometimes they do not give salary properly. Sometimes they do lot of this and that. But when they go under multinational company, and multinational company nurture this kind, I'm just giving example from garments industry. I do not know much about your agricultural sectors, but they maintain compliance, and they push to the owners that you have to maintain hygienics and this and that and this kind of thing. This will be the environment. This will be the quality management systems. I'm also actually once upon a time I was auditor for ISO 9001 2008. So that's why I visited a lot of corporate like a manufacturing hub. So I don't know. From my point of view, if it's a multinational company, if multinational company go to any developing countries, it can be mobile phone, it can be garments, it can be whatever it is. I saw a very good improvement. Example, Bangladesh after 90s, it has huge economical growth only because of many multinational companies go there. Government become more opens. Example, Dr. Iqbal Kadir from MIT, he forward Bikash, Grameen phones, all of the big technologies, and they maintain actually quality and they maintain good environment. I'm very honest with you. If I compare to the local organization and multinational company organizations, even you ask any young people, what do you want to job or do your work? Their first choice will be multinational company, not even government organization, not even example national private organizations. I'm just give as I strongly engage with developing like countries, and I saw even I helped to build up some group of companies. So I saw that if multinational company go, it's good for economy. Anyway, I directly want to go for the concluding remarks, and it's really very very good sessions. I think it's come up with a very interesting idea, very interesting thoughts, and we want to welcome everyone, especially Professor Edwards and all of you. We have to create better policy for developing nations, because your inputs and other things will be very helpful, and definitely the planning ministries and other things we will forward to this session, especially few developing countries. Maybe we can contribute for policy development. Professor Edward, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Okay. Let me make a few remarks. By the way, my organization, the Human Achievement Alliance, is formed to celebrate merit and achievement. So that's what we want to do. We want to encourage people to work to the best of their abilities. And by the way, the way you tell whether a company is doing well is Apple went from being a very small startup company in someone's garage to one of the richest companies in the world. And you can argue about Steve Jobs, who was apparently not a nice person sometimes, but guess what? Apple has so enriched the world, and as well as Microsoft and Samsung, if you want a South Korean company. This is wonderful, and we have to keep the system open. The next point I want to make is we really, when we talk about, well, we have to plan this and plan that and so forth. The answer is no. What we have to do is governments have to plan to keep a system open. They have to plan to look at things about infrastructure. These are important things we've had discussions about in the past. They have to plan to allow systems that are not in the way. For example, we don't like trade protection. It doesn't help anybody, quite frankly. But the idea is, well, we think things are distributed poorly, so we need to plan, because the planners, especially in the West and especially in the United States, are going to be government officials who have political interests that don't necessarily conform to consumer interests. So when I think of an enlightened government, I think of a government that wants its people to flourish and give them the opportunity, as Malaysia is doing and some of the other countries we have discussed here. I'll make two more final remarks. One is agriculture is a very interesting topic, because I did a lot of work in terms of agriculture in Africa back when I was originally doing my development work. And one of the problems there was that governments, for example, had marketing boards where the farmers were forced to sell to the government marketing board for a very low price. And so the profit was taken in by the government, not by the people who are actually doing the farming. There are lots of Africa is a really tragic situation, because they did have a lot of resources, and It was just mismanaged by government. And in terms of quality, one of the big problems, for example, today when people talk about green cars and how wonderful they are, there's a human as well as a environmental tragedy going on in, for example, Congo, where children are forced to mine cobalt, and in China, where you have rare earth elements, and in South America, Lithuania. So there are these issues that I think are very important issues. So when you talk about some of these things, you do have to look at these issues, and we know the problems of some of the slave labor issues in China. But I want to end by this. I want to get back to what we were talking about, and that is distributed manufacturing. And we really do have incredible opportunities for entrepreneurial companies, entrepreneurial individuals, so forth, with the new manufacturer. I'll just mention one example is software as a service. Most people think of software as something you have to have on your system, and if you have a big manufacturing facility, you need it all in-house. But one of the big breakout things that helps distributed manufacturing is software as a service, where and this is part of the Internet of Things that I think you mentioned earlier. So we really do have incredible opportunities. When I talk about globalization, I'm not talking about a bunch of bureaucrats getting together and saying, "Hey, let's have a tax on everybody." That's not, to me, that's basically controlling markets with politicians. I want globalization to be this open system where an entrepreneur in Malaysia and an entrepreneur in this country and an international company can diversify in Malaysia and Indonesia and the United States and all. That's the model I see. In distributed manufacturing, the potential really is there to enrich everybody in the world. We're not going to need government regulators to redistribute wealth, because everyone is going to be working at higher earning power. And just like Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea went from being poverty-stricken, war-torn countries to what they are today, every country can do that.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Professor, unmute, please.
That's a beautiful view. I think that if you look realistically in the United States over the last decades, the actual amount of earning that people had has not changed. And the very top percentage, and I don't know, it seems to me that in a moral society or just society, or in some sort of a world, let's put it the other way, if things are really, really, really unfair, and eventually what happens is it traditionally destabilizes society. And I think it's destabilizing the United States because the economic, it is just so out of whack. And we talk about merit. So we say if somebody went to Harvard, they must have gone to Harvard because they're really, really smart and they deserve it. But the interesting thing I just read is that 50% of the people that go to Harvard are in the top 1% economically. They come from the top 1% of economic backgrounds. 4% come from the bottom fifth. 4%. So basically, we could say in our mind, well, they deserve it. I mean, the 4% who didn't get into Harvard don't deserve to get into Harvard because they're lazy, they're dumb, they're whatever. That's why they're in the bottom fifth. It must be just because they're not good people, they're bad people. And the truth of the matter is we give that message to people, and then the people in the bottom fifth start assimilating that and becoming to think that everything that they do is their own fault. But it's like the thing I told you about in The Long Shadow. The idea that you have an uncle or something like that can help you get a job, that's unfair, that's ridiculous. I mean, human beings live in networks of relationships with other human beings. I mean, how do you get the information about a job at a tire shop or something like that? I mean, that isn't going to be put out on the internet or something. Somebody's going to be able to you need just word of mouth. In fact, research has shown that in blue collar jobs, people prefer to hire people that they have a relationship with. It's basically because if you hire your daughter-in-law, your daughter's husband like that, then if the husband starts messing up, then you can tell your daughter to go kick his ass. and there's these networks of relationships that we're all involved with. And I don't know 100% for sure how to go about it, but there's the thing that I'm saying is that it goes backwards, because somebody gets into Harvard, then we tell stories about them. Then they must be really, really smart, and they must be really, really great. You know, like Trump bought his way into Wharton. And I mean, you can go right down the list of all these. There was a recent scandal where Felicity something movie stars and things like that were basically gaming the SATs and bribing coaches and doing all this kind of stuff. So we don't have, we give too much credit sometimes to individuals and to institutions where people are allegedly meritorious. And I think it goes to what James has said. The whole thing about safety net, one of the things that makes entrepreneurship so great, or the ability to start companies in Finland, is that they do have that health insurance if the company fails. They do have a way to be able to eat and not die if their company fails. In the United States, it's so kind of bogus, because these great entrepreneurs, to a large extent, were actually wealthy people. I mean, Musk was extremely wealthy. You know, you could just go right down the line. And we look at Jobs and Wozniak, but they lived in. I wanted to build a computer, but I couldn't afford the parts. I couldn't get them. But Wozniak and Jobs lived in Palo Alto. They just got the parts, the extra parts that were lying around at computer companies. I mean, it's like we don't see the luck. And I think that what we need, if I was somehow very influential in a company, and I actually did have some influence in Finland on this, is that I pointed out that luck, that you need to develop a situation that builds luck, which is, it's possible to do, and it's got to do with the relationships that you have. And I think that for something like distributed manufacturing, I distributed as much as I possibly could, because the more people I can get information from, and the more sources of places that I have to go to market it, to build it, to develop it, to improve it, and things like that, the better off I'm going to be. And so for a small country that doesn't have resources like Finland, or even Malaysia has more limited, you know, it's not an oil giant, or it's not, you know, you don't get gold and things like that from there. It's got its own, its own resources. I mean, and that's the thing too. Every country has its own particular resources. And so continue to embrace it, but be cautious that you don't like lose a lot of value that's actually there by narrowing your view of what value is to such a point that you're excluding as you said, you go everywhere, Sharif, and there's brilliant, genius people just everywhere, and they're not the ones that have the resources to become entrepreneurs. They're not the ones, and to develop ways of embracing that genius and getting it to be part of your culture and your society, I think would be something that developing nations could do that would be beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. No, definitely, knowledge is important. I really appreciate it. I just want to share one of the great entrepreneur informations. He is American, but he is from Bangladesh, and he developed all of the industry we are discussing about, mobile phones or mobile money transferring. Dr. Iqbal Qadir. he was professor of MIT, and he's a great entrepreneur. Why I'm just sharing, Dr. Iqbal Kadir, actually Kadir brothers, his brothers and everyone, he's developed Grameen phone, uh, like Bikash, all of them are billion-dollar company, and he is from a I know his like where he born in Joshua, a small villages and a small district in Bangladesh, and then he get chance in 1976. He get admission in USA, and he visited USA. USA, that is the beautiful thing USA has. USA actually own very talented from around the world, and he was professor of MIT, and then he introduced some important business, those who are not performing very well in example Telenor not performing very well in Europe. Then when he introduced in Bangladesh, it's just boom, just mobile phone, it's become billion-dollar company. So I personally meet with him and his brothers and everyone's, and how they actually introducing technology to Bangladesh, because they are one of the key players, entrepreneurs, those who actually change the country, those who actually change the developing nations. You can see that Bangladesh GDP is sustainability, growth, economical factor now in very good shapes. Even if we compare in South Asia, they are growing. Means Asia Pacific, if we observe Vietnam doing very well, in South Asia, Bangladesh doing very well. He is one of the key players. So entrepreneurship is very important. Even this Ivy League education, I trust that this Ivy League educations, and America has very good culture. This culture is actually important. So even though they are from a very ordinary family, but now they contribute a lot, not only for their own life. I think they change million and million people life. So definitely we will invite this his brothers Kamal Kadir, because regularly I communicate with him, so he will join in World Talent Economy Forum, and definitely Iqbal Kadir, I will invite him. So entrepreneurship is important. So our speakers always, Professor Donald, Mr. James Seed, even Manuel, Edward, all of the speakers always say entrepreneurship is the key. So they are actually set the example, even though a developing nations has very big future if we can introduce the right technology or right business to a country. So thank you. I'm just sharing because today's session actually excellent, like learning session for our audience. So it's just views that every country has different things. Malaysia also have very interesting entrepreneurs. I want to invite you all. I'm sure that how you see the ecosystem, you will be impressed. So Mr. Manuel, what's your concluding remarks today? And finally, Mr. Jemsit. Mr. Manuel.
Sure. Thank you so much. Today, I wanted to add a point that Mr. James usually he used to add, is that we are learning a lot from this session. And yeah, thank you for for the invitation. So yeah, what I wanted to point out is yeah, like our guest speakers mentioned it, it's important to keep the system open for multinational companies, inviting multinational companies to get installed in the developing countries. So I would say that the agriculture example that I gave was just to bring up the ethics and social responsibility. But if we take telecommunication, it is like it's because of the multinational companies that some in developing countries they have access to internet and telecommunication. So it's also giving a lot of like it's doing a lot of good in the developing countries. So I would like to also add that it's important to keep the policy, like the policy makers should also look into the different aspects for the globalization, and yeah, to point out the ethics and social responsibility because it is really important. Thank you so
Mhm.
much.
No, definitely. That's why I give example of this Iqbal Kadir, because they are actually make a transparent ecosystem. And I can remember with only mobile money transferring, because as a researcher, I work with grassroots level people. Trust me, it's a huge improvement. Millions and million people life improvement. Only the mobile money transferring through the mobile money transferring, because before that they have lot of challenges, lot of problem, unimaginable. And I know that millions of people actually getting uh, uh, enjoying these services, they utilizing this just mobile money transferring, and it's also a $1 billion business, I think, in between 6-7 years. I know Iqbal Kadir, how he grow Bikash inside Bangladesh. And that's why entrepreneurship, innovations, technology, I always a big fan of technology. That's why we introduce a lot of technological discussions back, because technology actually bring transparency. Technology brings lot of connectivity, lot of productivity inside a country. Even as I'm from a developing nation, I can feel, I can understand what going on inside the country. And if we can introduce good technology, only one good technology, and if we have a better policy and better ecosystem, it will be really, really helpful for us. So, Mr. Jamsid, what's your concluding remarks today?
Thank you again, Sharif. Great show. And you're doing a terrific job of day after day after day of producing great shows. Always happy to be here. The couple of things I want to start with is, I don't know if you can guess where this shirt was made. It's a Hawaiian shirt. There's a company called Tory Richards that makes great shirts. And in 1921, Hawaii was not a state. In 2021, Hawaii is a state. And my point is that the only constant is change. Things keep changing. And so we have to be nimble and agile and quick to adapt to the changing environment. And so yeah, I wish Professor Edward was still here, because he and I have the same goals, but we look at things a little bit differently. And I tried to look at a reality based, and I don't think data is reality. And if you concentrate on data, you can miss the big picture of what's going on around here. Data is a tool. You can learn a lot from data, but it isn't reality, because you can have confirmation bias in how you assemble that data. And you can also think, okay, there's 20% of people living in abject poverty, and think that that is a data point. Well, what about the people who are actually living in abject poverty? So you don't just use your head, you use your heart. And I'm not here to change people's minds. I'm here to change people's hearts.
Excellent.
We have to think about us as people. There, hippie somewhere in our time became a 4-letter word, but there was a song that I can still remember. Come on, people, now smile on your brother. Everybody got together, got to love one another right now. And that's what I'm saying. Right now, we have to change our hearts, because we don't have a lot of time left until we start to cooperate, work together, and be each other's brother. And it's like, to think of my true family, my extended family, my biological family, my extended family, my community, keep going until you are thinking of the planet Earth as your home, and everyone who lives on it is your kin. You're related to them, not just this country, because in nature, boundaries are mountain ranges, seas, oceans, wide rivers that are hard to pass. But what we've done is created maps and atlases and globes and made artificial lines on them. And we call those boundaries. They don't exist in nature. I could walk my dog from upper Massachusetts into Vermont, and I didn't know I was in Vermont. There was no sign in nature that I was in Vermont. I was in a different state. How would I know? I was in the same woods. So we've got to get past thinking of each other as separate states, separate countries, separate continents. We've got to start thinking as one. And that is hard to do from up here. It's easier to do from in here. And I believe the last point that I wanted to make, not the last, because I wanted to double down on what Donald was saying, is that, we can talk about human achievement in terms of merit, but, there's a luck. There's also luck. There's a whole bunch of luck involved in human achievement. And I'll talk about the what my father taught me. He said, my parents' generation all went to Ivy League schools, Yale and Brown, or this women went to the sister schools, they got married. And the first thing he taught me was, I'm not going to an Ivy League school. And the reason is there's no way a Catholic is going to be joining Skull and Bones. And in Skull and Bones, what happens is that you build this network that Donald was talking about. And so if somebody you went to Skull and Bones with has a son and he's good at this thing, but you don't have that skill set required in your company, you would know somebody who needs that skill set in some other company, and you just pick up the phone, call somebody, and that guy gets hired. Well, it doesn't work that way for a lot of people. So it could be, the luck could be where you were born, who you were born to, and what society you ended up belonging to, and who do you know who's in your network. And is that about what the type of person you are? Your skill set? Not hardly. It's not about those things. So we have to look at this, and it's the same thing with governments. We have to think about the world's government instead of, and Edward was also talking about, don't let government get involved. That are planners. Well, it's a trust issue. People don't trust lawyers. People don't trust politicians. Most of the politicians are lawyers. Blah blah blah. The most unethical people I've ever dealt with in my life have been business people, and they justify it to themselves by saying, "Oh, it's just business. That's screw this guy over. Just business." So let's not just say all business people would be better at making these decisions. And I also, in the chess world, we say even a bad plan is better than no plan at all. So of course we have to plan, but we have to do it wisely. That's very difficult. And we can't do it for selfish interests. We have to do it for selfless interests, including others in your calculations, including the effect of your behavior on others. So, and once we change our hearts so that we're thinking about others first instead of ourselves first, our plans will be bad. And if we have no plan, that's even worse than a bad plan. So we have to be trying to think about the future. And can we be successful at this? Yes and no, because we guarantee you it will change. So you have to adapt your plan as the world changes around you. You can't go in there, I figured it out, I'm going to go ahead forward, and it'll be just like this 20 years from now, because it won't be. The rate of change is accelerating. It's like a hockey stick. It was like this for a while, now it's going like that. So the pace of change is accelerating, and we have to be more nimble, quicker than we ever were before in terms of our brains. But we have to expand our hearts primarily, so that we can smile at one another instead of frown. And I think the last point is just been made. I ran out of my notes. It's hard for me to read my notes sometimes, but I really appreciate being invited to these shows. I wish I could attend more frequently, but I have my foundation to run. My foundation is a not-for-profit. But I have started for-profit companies as well. And the startup costs are prohibitive for many. If you want to start up a not-for-profit, you're talking about $250,000 to guarantee your survival. You have to plan for a year or two of not making much money, not getting money donations, So, can everyone start up their own foundation? Do they want to? Can they do it if they could? Yes. But can everyone? No, because we have to factor in money. It's not just merit, it's money. And who has the money sometimes can do what they want, like build a rocket to Mars. So thanks again, Sharif. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsid, Mr. Manuel, and Professor Donald for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. This is really, really great discussions. It will be really helpful for our audience. I request all of our audience share our content as much as possible with your government, with your policymakers, with your corporation, as well as with your academy. I'm sure this kind of discussion will help you to understand the global perspective, and it will help you to grow and make a right decision. Professor Donalds, Manuels, Jamsid, thank you for your support and your collaborations with World Talent Economy Forum. Bye-bye and take care. Bye. Take care.